Voltaire, who many of you will know has a quote for just about everything, said, "It is lamentable that to be a good patriot, one must be the enemy of the rest of mankind." Now, I've been a patriot since I was a small boy, and I've never been anybody's enemy that I know of. But more recently, I've been an entrepreneur, and as part of my business, I travel the world and see patriotism in other countries, other people's views on patriotism, all the more interesting because of the way the world is changing. I've seen patriotism that is good, that is bad, that is brave, but in every single case, it is different. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to try and find a resolution on different people's patriotism? And what better place to start than Folkestone? Now, here in Folkestone, 2 years ago to the day, this town, which is only 30 miles from France, and because of that, or despite that, voted to leave the European Union by 59%. Now, this was either a national calamity or was our nation's famous day, depending on which politician you choose to believe. But either way, these two opposing points of view from people who believe in the national interest, and indeed, I'm sure, are patriots, conflict against each other, so we need to find a resolution. And it's made all the more difficult because of the way the world is changing. So my question is, how do we become a patriot in this age of globalization? Well, the first thing is to consider that really this is all about enlightened self-interest. In the same way that a child loves a mother and looks to the mother for protection and succor, I really believe that we are all patriotic at birth because we have an innate feeling, an innate search for protection from something else. Now, the Greeks and the Romans understood this very well if you look at that literature. But I think it was best described by the English philosopher 300 years ago, Thomas Hobbes, who came up with the idea of the Leviathan. Now, the Leviathan is a mythical creature reaching out over the land, rather like Godzilla. And at his head is the crowned king, would have been a king. In his right hand is a sword, and this represents protection. And if you look at the skin, what appear to be scales are in fact people, hundreds of people acting in unison to give flesh to the idea of a sovereign state born out of protection. Now, of course, if we are seeking protection from the state, that also involves some responsibilities. And dying for your country, pro patria mori, is widely seen by poets and politicians alike as the purest form of patriotism. Some, of course, see it as heroic. Some, of course, see it as a tragic waste. But it's still a devotion and a duty to a country. Now, back in 1992, I was a soldier in the British Army in what is now known as the First Gulf War. And I saw people die for their country, and in fact, sadly, played a part in some of those deaths. I was there as a volunteer doing my duty as I saw it to my country. But my opponent's patriotism was no less than mine simply because they were an unwilling conscript in someone else's war. We were both devoting ourselves to the protection of our country. Now, clearly, patriotism isn't all about physical protection. It's also about economic protection, economic well-being, prosperity, and there's always been a great search, if you like, for the perfect system of government that is most likely to provide prosperity for the people. All the more so, made all the more confusing by globalization, which is the movement, the global movement of capital, people and goods that confuses the matter. Now, the European Union tries to resolve this with the concept of pooled sovereignty. It's a great idea, but the problem with pooled sovereignty is if something is pooled, it's not owned, and if it's not owned, it's not cared for. The Mitad del Mundo, the center of the earth, is a dusty town just outside Quito in Ecuador. And in 1736, a group of scientists from the French Academy of Science went to the center of the earth, as it was called in the Mayan language, to discover the equator, to pinpoint the equator using their theodolites and their pendulums. And they found the spot. And this very spot, you can go there now, there's a very large granite memorial, and there is a brass strip running along the ground of the equator. And thousands of tourists over the years have gone there, including me, and jumped from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere like this. But the trouble is, they put it in the wrong place. And in 1997, a group of students with the newly invented GPS went there to check the French scientists' work, and they found that the actual line ran 240 meters to the north through the cafeteria and the toilet block. So the students followed the actual line of the GPS, and they came across Caterquila Hill, and on the top of Caterquila Hill, they found something amazing. Because on top of Caterquila Hill, there was a Neolithic crescent of built stones, built about 1500 BC, just as the Mayan civilization was starting. And they measured one horn of the crescent, and it directly touched the actual equator that they had measured with their GPS. And that was no coincidence, because the other horn was off by 23.5 degrees, which the geographers amongst you will know is the tilt of the Earth on its axis. So in fact, what these students had discovered was an ancient astronomical clock built by the early Mayan civilization, and using this clock, you could tell the spring and the autumn equinox, and the winter and summer solstice. And therefore, that government had the sacred power to tell people, through a system of beacons, when to plant, when to harvest. And this direct economic benefit to 10 million people of different tribes, stretching over a landscape of 3,000 miles, kept devotion, loyalty, patriotism, if you like, from those people for nearly 2,000 years. So if we consider that the physical protection, economic protection are like the skin and the bones of this idea of patriotism, we need to put some flesh on it. And flesh is really about home, because patriotism ultimately is about home, and soldiers call this hearth and home as an idea. Now, when I was in the Gulf, I read the war poets, and some were sad and some were inspiring, but they all sought sanctuary in the idea of home. So for William Butler Yeats's Irish Airmen, it is the parish of Kiltartan. I know that I will meet my fate somewhere in the clouds above. Those that I fight I do not hate, those that I guard I do not love. My country is Kiltartan's cross, my countrymen Kiltartan's poor. Or for Edward Thomas, can hear a blackbird sing. Close by, now farther, mistier, further and further, all the birds of Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire. But it doesn't need to be about war. Home is close to home, is intimate. John Betjeman can find this intimacy in a mouse in a church, or a gable roof, or the gulls reflecting the sharp spring sun. But home, of course, is not just simply about the physical. It's about the people within that home. And when people come together in a home, it's rather like musicians in an orchestra. the sum is so much greater than the parts, with the power and the beauty and the emotion. And in our country, it doesn't really matter whether it's Scouts, Morris dancing, Britain's Got Talent, Notting Hill Carnival. These are all glorious parts of one home that make home. But there's one other aspect, which is, if you like, the heart. And this is a sense of belonging. And for patriotism, one has to have a sense of belonging. Now, very often, this is referred to through national stereotypes. So I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of heaven and hell, where heaven is where the police are British, the chefs are French, the mechanics are German, of course, the lovers are Italian, and it's all organised by the Swiss. Hell, on the other hand, is where the police are German, the chefs are British, the mechanics are French, the lovers are Swiss, and it's all organised by the Italians. But these stereotypes actually come through into reality. And not long ago, I was in Hong Kong at a British club in Hong Kong, watching the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. And as you can imagine, 5,000 miles away, there was a sea of Union Jacks, and the patriotism was infectious. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house, and I succumbed myself. But then I suddenly thought, should I be enjoying myself, or should I be embarrassed that I'm getting emotional? And I thought, do you know, how very British, the idea of being embarrassed at something that the rest of the world finds amazing. But the best example, I think, of the sense of belonging is the New Zealand All Blacks, the New Zealand national rugby team. Now, here is a team that has beaten every country it's ever played against and has won 80% of its international matches, which is a remarkable achievement. And you have to ask yourself why. Is it in the weather? Is it in the water? Of course it's not. It's in self-belief. They have the self-confidence to believe that they can do it. And they have the self-knowledge to know enough about themselves that they matter in the world, but also enough about themselves that they matter to each other. So when looking at all this, I think there are three main conclusions. The first, this debate about patriotism and our relationship with foreign powers and our place in the world is not new. It didn't happen 2 years ago. It's been debated for 2,000 years. So we must accept that this is just part of the ebb and flow of history. Secondly, in a world where the global, the local, and the familiar matter more than ever, as Edmund Burke said 300 years ago, to be attached to the subdivision, to love the little platoon that we belong to in society, is the first principle, the germ, as it were, of public affection. It is the first link in the series by where we proceed to a love of our country and to mankind. And finally, we've got to have the self-belief that we matter to the world and matter to each other. We must take our inspiration from the All Blacks and the Leviathan and go out there in the world with our self-belief. Because if we don't believe in ourselves, who is going to believe in us? Thank you very much.